record to this computer.
You can hit the yellow one again.
And then I can hit the yellow one. Thanks, David.
Oh, just kidding.
Well, we could.
You can put it behind stuff, maybe.
Yeah, it's okay. I can get over it.
Should be fine.
We'll at least get an audio recording.
No, they still take the video. It should be.
You guys, this is really an honor for me to introduce Dr. Melanie Dreher to you. Let me put it this way, 30 years before you were born, she was in Jamaica interviewing Rastafarians about their cannabis use. She's one of the good ones, one of the oldest cannabis researchers around, and she has experience that is really unequaled by anybody else's work. She's got her doctorate at Columbia University in anthropology. That led to her studies in Jamaica, which she's going to tell you stories about. She's published books and lots of articles and is very knowledgeable in this topic and is invited to speak all over the world to people about cannabis. So please welcome Dr. Dreher.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks, Jeff. Some of that is true. Since we're a small group, I thought it'd be good for me to just know your name so that we can have a dialogue, if that would be okay. So, since you're the furthest away, can we start with you? Dre?
Trey.
T-R-A-Y? T-R-E-Y, okay. Okay, next.
David.
David, okay. Kaylee.
Eloisa.
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 Oh, okay. Eloisa.
And Isaiah.
Isaiah. Great. Well, thanks for coming today, and it's really a great pleasure to be here and meet with you. I have another sort of motive for being in California. I have a son who lives in Willits, California, so I was up visiting grandbabies yesterday, so it was really fun to be up there and then come here. And this is the first time I've been at Sonoma State, so on their beautiful campus, so this is great. Thank you. I'm a nurse as well as an anthropologist, and I started out 1,000 years ago in anthropology at Columbia, and I had never thought about being an anthropologist at all, but I really loved the works of Margaret Mead, who was a very famous anthropologist at the time, and had an opportunity to work with her at Columbia University. And I was also very interested in how we take concepts, theories, ideas, and beliefs that we have in one culture and evaluate them from the perspective of another culture. Margaret Mead did that with adolescence. She said, why are Americans having such a difficult time with adolescence when adolescence is just an easy time in other cultures? And did the work to show why that might be the case. So that was the idea of saying, maybe this works here or doesn't work here in our society, but how do we test it someplace else and see? So I had the opportunity to do that with cannabis. I was a young doctoral student, first-year doctoral student at Columbia University, and my major professor was applying for a research grant, funding for a research grant from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And there was a very enlightened person at the National Institute at that time who thought, what's going on with marijuana in the United States. And we had never really, marijuana was not a problem when I was growing up. And people didn't even talk about it. And it wasn't until the 1960s where people began to be sensitized to this. It had been used in by musicians and artists, but had never quite found its way into the college population. And when it did, people began to be pretty worried about what was going on with this drug that they didn't know about, or this substance they didn't know about. And the National Institute on Drug Abuse was interested in the impact of chronic use, not just what happens to you immediately after ingesting marijuana, but what happens if you use this substance all the time for several years. And the proposed study examined 3 cultures in which marijuana was used consistently, and that was in Costa Rica, Greece in the form of hashish, and in Jamaica as something that Jamaicans call ganja, which you probably have heard that term before. So after a year taking courses in anthropology, my professor said, well, let's see if you can cut it, go to a country, a village that you've never lived in before and don't know anybody, and spend the summer and find out everything you can about a substance that carried a 2-year mandatory prison sentence for possession. I said, oh, no problem, I'm on my way. So in 1969, he put me on a mountaintop. This is the same summer that American astronauts set foot on the moon for the first time ever, and also when 400,000 of my best friends attended a concert in Woodstock, New York, which is the likes of which has never been repeated. And so there I was, however, not enjoying Woodstock and not really taking part in the news about the moon, but on a mountaintop with no electricity, no plumbing, running water, telephone, or transportation. And I did not know a lot about Jamaica. And I actually knew nothing about cannabis or marijuana because I had never smoked anything. And I didn't actually know that much about anthropology. So I was clearly perfectly qualified to do this work. I had it all. So I got to this mountaintop and started talking about, and I thought, wow, an illegal substance, nobody's going to talk to me about this. But it turned out that, in fact, people did talk to me. And I attribute that to my being a nurse, actually. I was used to asking sensitive questions and getting answers and having conversations about intimate topics and so forth. So I think my nursing skill really helped me in that environment. And so we managed to, I managed to come back with a fair amount of information about what was going on and why it was used and why it was, and in what kind of context. And I discovered that it was mostly men, in fact, exclusively men who smoked marijuana. And the women were in charge of marijuana medicine. So here was a substance that not only had recreational value for men, but also was a very powerful part of the folk pharmacopoeia, that it was used for just about everything from early childhood, giving children who were teething drops of eyedropper full of tea or medicine, to mothers who wanted to make sure their children were smart and healthy and prepared tea, cannabis tea for them 3 times a week. Now, you can imagine what would have happened to those mothers if they had been in this culture. But in Jamaica, where folk remedies were rampant and there were many, many substances, people would say to me, we've got a lot of good folk medicines, but ganja is the king of it. Now, ganja was not indigenous to Jamaica. It came from indentured labor from East India. And when those folks came over to Jamaica to work in the sugarcane industry, picking and loading cane, they brought their ganja with them. Very much like the Mexican community after the Mexican Revolution in 1910 brought cannabis in the form of marijuana to the United States. But this was such an attractive substance and had so many uses that it very quickly spread through the Jamaican population and took on several uses. And at that time, Rastafarianism, are you familiar with the Rastafarian religion, Bob Marley? Well, okay, well, very, very quickly, Rastafarians believe that Haile Selassie, who was Prince of Ethiopia, was the living God, and that at some point in time, all Black men would be, or Black people, would be repatriated to Africa. And they would be disciples of Haile Selassie, or the Prince of Ethiopia, Rastafari, Prince of Ethiopia. And they rejected the white man's use of alcohol and took on ganja as the sacrament for people who were Rastafarians. So here we were in a country that in which cannabis in the form of ganja was so popular. It had recreational value, it had medicinal value, it had religious value. And yet it still carried a 2-year mandatory prison sentence for possession. So you get this sense of discontinuity between the working class people and what was going on at the highest level of government in Jamaica. And there's a reason for that. And if I don't get to it, please ask me the question later so that I can explain to you why that was going on. So I spent the summer, had a wonderful summer, went back and made my report. And he said, well, we got funded, so now I want you to go back again and recruit the subjects for a medical anthropological study. So we needed 60 men to go into the hospital for a period of 2 weeks each and be subjected to a number of studies. Everything from a psychological battery to a physiological blood tissue and test, the whole panorama of what's going on with these guys. My job was to recruit subjects, and I had to recruit 30 users and 30 non-users. And the 30 users that I recruited was not a problem. Finding 30 matched non-users in a country in which 85% of the working class male population is smoking marijuana was really hard. But it helped to explain many of the findings of the study. For example, we found that comparing the users and the non-users using psychological tests, we found that the users were much better adjusted than the non-users. Well, the immediate assumption is, clearly there's a correlation between being well adjusted and adapted to your environment and so forth, and the use of cannabis. But when you think about it, the 30 users that I managed to recruit for the study, there was already something a little weird about them. They didn't gather with the other men in the rum shops after work or down at the river to have a smoke. They were a little odd, and in Jamaica at the time, and still, the belief was that you had to smoke. In order to smoke marijuana, you had to have the brains for it. And they also imparted the information that, in fact, that's why women couldn't smoke marijuana, that they just didn't have the brains to handle the psychoactive effects. I just sort of put that in my pocket and dealt with it. But you can imagine this tiny percentage of men who did not use it, who just weren't part of normal male society. And so we should not be surprised if they didn't fare as well on the study. Okay, so then I figured, all right, I have to do a dissertation on this. And at that time, I'm telling you this because I didn't always study just women and children. There was a theory called about the amotivational syndrome, that once you started smoking marijuana, cannabis on a regular basis, you would lose your ambition, drop out, not care about succeeding, and perhaps not finish college or not be able to take a job, etc. But I had found in that first summer something very interesting, that people in Jamaica were actually smoking marijuana to make them work harder. And on the sugarcane plantations, they called them bushers. They were managers who would come around and see how the men were loading the cane and cutting the cane. And in order to make them work faster and harder, they would actually dispense ganja for them to smoke. So the men would sit down and smoke, just like a coffee break, have a little smoke, and then they'd get up and work twice as hard, or at least they believed they worked twice as hard. So I said, something's very peculiar here, a real cultural dissonance. And by the way, do you have a question? Okay.
Do you want me to see?
You're welcome to ask it right now.
Was there like a language barrier?
A language barrier in Jamaica? Jamaicans, especially rural country Jamaicans, speak something called patois. And it's a combination of Elizabethan English, 15th century English, and West African. But you can hear it after a while. But they do understand and speak the King's English, and that's what was taught in the schools. So sometimes I would have to ask the men with whom I was working if they could translate a little bit. But if you know any Shakespeare, you can go to Jamaica and you'll hear some of it. For example, there's one of the plays, Falstaff says, to ask what time it is, he'll say, "How much o'clock?" Well, that's just how Jamaicans ask what time it is. So there's a little bit of a language barrier, but not insurmountable because they do speak English. Anyway, that became my dissertation of, all right, let's see whether in fact this is true. Is there really an amotivational syndrome that occurs universally for anyone who uses marijuana? And I studied men who were rural farm workers, cane workers, farmers, and so forth in 3 communities, and discovered that actually their use of marijuana had no impact on their work whatsoever, even though they would claim it made them work harder. And I've discovered this by actually measuring the tons of cane they cut, which was not hard for me to do because the factories where they cut the cane and then bring it to the factories, they had a measure for each man and how much cane he cut. So it was actually not hard to do. I found that there was no impact. But while I was there, and this is where we get to women and children, I noticed that, as I mentioned earlier, women routinely gave their families 2 or 3 times a week morning teas of ganja tea. And they believed it made them work harder, they're stronger, they ate more, so to keep them healthy and also to make them more productive. But for children especially, mothers believe that it helped them concentrate in school. So when I finished the 2-year study, and then I actually got a job after I graduated, and I had a couple babies and decided, okay, I need to continue this work. I went back to see if that were true. If children drink marijuana tea, do they actually perform better in school? So I went to a rural community, a different one than I had been in before. And first I talked to the teachers and I said, could you identify for me which of these children in this school you think might be drinking cannabis tea? And the teachers consistently picked out children who were not doing well in school and said, okay, probably this one and this one and this one. And that was part of my data set. And then I went to each of the families in these classrooms, and this was published in an education journal, and actually measured the amount of tea that they had consumed and when, how often, how much, and so forth. And I found that it was actually just the opposite. The children who were drinking cannabis tea, as the parents had predicted, were in fact performing at a higher level in school. But they were also the children who came to school most often. And they were also the children who had clean uniforms and little notebooks to write in and so forth. So that one of the things I discovered that preparation of cannabis tea for children was part of what I call the good mother syndrome. If you wanted your children to do well in school, you made sure that they had whatever was necessary, including shoes to make that long walk of 2.5 miles to school, and then were had a proper breakfast, had lunch at school, and so forth. And so once again, it was very hard to say that when I looked at the results of this study and found another correlation between really strong behavior, good behavior, positive behavior, and cannabis use. But was it really the cannabis use? The best we could say about a study like that is what we said about the earlier study. We know that it doesn't disadvantage them. And that was okay. That was important to be able to say that mothers knew what they were doing, gave their children the tea, and they did fine. While I was doing that study, I noticed that increasing numbers of women were starting to smoke cannabis in a manner not unlike the way men smoke it. They were smoking with their friends. They were smoking alone if they had a hard task to do. If they were going to the field to pick crops, or if they were even at home doing laundry, it was not uncommon for many of the women, not all of the women, many of the women to have a ganja cigarette, a spliff. And I thought, well, this is a change. Things are happening, and not in all the communities, but
What year was this?
This would be in about the 80s, somewhere about 82 or 84. And also the Rastafarian movement had given women a special place in that culture. They called the women who were Rastafarian as Rasta queens. And the men, unlike the men who were not Rastafarian, who criticized women when they smoked, unless it was in a pre-sexual context with them. But if they were smoking with friends or in a social manner, they didn't like that at all. But the Rastafarian men really felt their Rasta queens had the right to smoke, and felt that that was just part of their religion and part of Rastafarian culture. So we had a number of women and mothers who were smoking. I thought, well, this is an interesting phenomenon. Maybe I better take a look at this. And at the same time, the United States was reeling after just coming through the thalidomide crisis. And people were very, very interested in the teratogenic effects of any substance being used during pregnancy and what the outcome would be on the neonate. And at that time, and there's nothing to indicate that that is still not true, cannabis is the third most commonly used substance by pregnant women in the United States. So there was a particularly keen interest in looking at women who were users, and then when they got pregnant, what impact it had on their own prenatal experience and the neonatal experience of the newborn. And we used the same model that we used in the early study. We took 30 women who were cannabis users, and we matched them according to parity, the number of children they had already had, socioeconomic status, and age. So we had a very nice match sample from a rural parish in Jamaica, and followed the women from the third trimester all the way through their pregnancy. Then we measured we examined their neonates at 1 day, 3 days, and then 1 month. And we used a standardized test that had been developed in the United States by a group called the Brazelton Neonatal Group at Harvard. It was a very famous group for looking at variation in neonate behavior. And so we administered that in Jamaica, and it was absolutely fine with a population that wasn't American. It worked very well. And we discarded the first study, immediately after birth, within 24 hours, because there was such a variation, and some babies would catch it 3 hours, and some babies would catch it 24, and babies change a lot in the first 24 hours after birth. So we decided to use the 3-day measure to compare the neonates of these two samples, the exposed and non-exposed babies. And then we compared them again at 1 month. And we found that at 3 days, there was very, very little difference between the children, the exposed babies and the non-exposed babies. And this was a neurobehavioral test. So we would do things like drop a Kleenex on their face and see if the baby would raise their hand to push that away. Very kind of simple things, but simple things that would be a neonate would be capable of. And then we gave them the tests again at 1 month. At 1 month, we got very different results. We found that the babies of the mothers who were smokers did significantly better on every item of the Brazelton neonatal scale. And this was completely non-intuitive. We just assumed that there would be differences, and the differences would be in favor of the non-exposed babies. And that was not the case. And all of these mothers were breastfeeding. So we knew that they were getting, and cannabis passes through the mammary gland barriers, so that we knew these babies were all being had continued exposure to cannabis. And yet they were really very socially alert, had high neurological scores, and were doing very well. I will tell you that was probably one of the hardest studies to get published, because there was such resistance on the part of editors and such bias on the part of editors that they just didn't want to put it in. And it took us, actually, that study was completed around 89 or 90, and we could not get that published until 1995. And finally, Pediatrics, which is a medical journal, ended up publishing it. And then it sat there. I thought that there would be a response to the article, that people would be, writing in, and pediatricians would be saying, this is outrageous. Nothing. We got nothing. And then we didn't, the article sat there, and there was no public response at all. It did go online and on the web for a variety of reasons, but so that women who were interested, American women who were interested in the effects of ganja, marijuana during pregnancy, were very interested, and they actually, there was a whole dialogue that took place online about this particular study. But that was really the only response. And it wasn't until, almost 15 years later that I was walking into work one day. I was Dean of Nursing at Rush University before I retired in Chicago. And one of my students rode by on his bike, and he said, Dean Dreher, your study's gone viral. Now, this is 15 years later, when the American public began to be really sensitized to, is this really the problem that it's been purported to be? And we have actually found that with some of our other work that we've published as well. So then we had this nice study that was done, and we had a wonderful sample of 30 babies who had been exposed and 30 babies who had not been exposed. And the March of Dimes actually funded that study. And I thought, it's time to go to the federal government and see if they'll fund it. And in fact, National Institute on Drug Abuse, who had given me my pre-doc and my post-doc and everything else, said, yeah, we'll take a look at this, and gave me funding to go back and follow these children post-birth until age 5. And by that time, some of the children were already about 1.5 or 2. So really 2 to 5. And we wanted to look at their readiness for school and to see if their exposure, the prenatal exposure, had any impact on their beginning to be ready for school. And in fact, we found that there was just no impact of the cannabis at all. That the real issues had to do with children who had better environment for neonatal development than other children, and that the environmental factors, familial factors, economic factors, as we would predict, were much more powerful than whether they had been exposed prenatally. And so those results were published, and then of course we sent them into NIDA to ask for an extension to do the study from 5 to 10. And that's when you start to see something called executive function begin to operate, and with these children be able to actually execute in their academic environment, accomplish tasks, become good students. And that's when I got the call from NIH saying, you know what, Melanie, we're not going to fund you anymore they didn't like the results of the study. And they said, unless you can find something negative or something wrong with cannabis, we can't fund you because Congress will not like your findings. And we get our money from Congress. And if you could just find one bad thing about cannabis and follow that trajectory. And I said, you know, these are the data. I met the terms of my NIH contract. I did the study. I collected the data, analyzed it. Everything was done very carefully. And it was, I can't change the data. These are the facts. And so I really, at that point, said, okay, enough. I don't want to have to fight these battles with the federal government. So I discontinued that work for a little while, and I thought, well, maybe I've done everything that I, as a researcher, am supposed to do, and maybe someone else can take this up. So by this time, we're in the 90s, and I wasn't sure exactly where I wanted to go with this, but I was teaching, and I was a dean of nursing at University of Massachusetts. And I said, you know, I'm going to continue to take students to Jamaica, nursing students to Jamaica, where they can really learn a different way of a different kind of nursing practice. And that was a very good thing to do. They came back, it controvertibly changed, and their whole way of thinking about patient care was different. But while I was there, I noticed that in Jamaica, cocaine had entered the substance abuse scene. And this was very sad for me because with marijuana, there was a culture for marijuana. When there's a culture for marijuana, rules are developed by people about who should smoke it, when, where, at what age. All these things just emerge from the culture to say, and that's how you control a phenomenon culturally. They didn't need laws. They didn't need a 2-year mandatory sentence. They had their own laws that were well obeyed. So if they saw, you know, a 12-year-old, the older men in the village would say, boy, you know, you're too young. Wait 5 years. Then you can be a man. Then you can do this. So there were all these kinds of things that I had been recording and thought, someday I'm going to write the book on how a culture monitors itself with regard to substances. But when cocaine came in, there was just no culture for cocaine, crack cocaine at all. Crack is, as you probably know, is a highly addictive substance. It's the most addictive form of, crack is the most addictive form of cocaine. And what we were seeing is a big rise in prostitution, some serious and big rise in crime. And the cocaine was coming in on, Jamaica was a transshipment port from South America to Louisiana, to Miami. So they would get to Jamaica, drop bales off the ship, and then the fishermen would go out and help them bring in these bales of cocaine. And then they would be transported to another place, put on a different ship, and then taken into the United States. And the fishermen who were and transporters had never heard of crack or cocaine before. They had no idea what it was. And but that's how they were paid. So everyone had their pound of cocaine to take in. But they quickly learned from people in other countries who would come down and show them how to make crack. And Kingston and Montego Bay had a real crack cocaine problem. And we were seeing increasing numbers of women using it. And I went to the State Department at the time and said, you know, would you guys fund me to look at this substance use in general throughout Jamaica? I took 5 students, anthropology students down there, put them in different locations throughout Jamaica, and did a study of all substance use and how it's used. And of course, the sort of heroes of that crack cocaine war between crack and ganja were really the Rastafarians, who would have nothing to do with crack cocaine. Marijuana was their substance, and they feel that it gave them the protection from crack cocaine. So I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So I got the State Department to fund a study of sex workers in Jamaica, in Kingston, who were crack cocaine users. And I wanted to see how they were using it, how often, under what context, and how that linked to what they were doing with marijuana. And it was a very interesting time. For me personally, I already had a DEA license that I could carry any substance anywhere in the world, and was authorized to do so. Then when I started working with sex workers, it took on another kind of phenomenon, because people would say, do you have any substance? And of course, gave me a lot of leverage with my 2 sons, who were teenagers by this time, and they kept introducing me to their friends as, meet my mom, she studies drugs and sex in Jamaica. She's so cool, you know. So that study was really enlightening for me. And I think when I look back at it, maybe one of my greatest contributions in this 40-year journey of understanding marijuana use in Jamaica. Because one of the things it made clear was that ganja is not, or marijuana is not a precondition to crack cocaine use. It is not a gateway drug. Most of the women, because women most of the women in Jamaica did not smoke ganja. Crack cocaine was the first substance they smoked. And then they started and had never smoked ganja at all. And then women were given what they call a seasoned spliff. And a seasoned spliff is a cigarette, a ganja cigarette that has been laced with cocaine. And they found, just by trial and error, that it was easier for them to use crack cocaine in that way, because they didn't immediately want more. So they would say, when I smoke crack cocaine, I feel it feels great. Then I have this sudden precipitous drop, and I feel really bad, and I need to have some more right away. Whereas when they smoked the seasoned spliff, they didn't feel that need to have another crack cocaine immediately. And so some of the women started looking at this as a way of actually relinquishing their crack cocaine habit. And today we're seeing, and I did write about that, and found that this was already happening in Brazil as well, that people who were using crack cocaine were getting off crack cocaine by smoking marijuana or using marijuana in some form. And today, when I look at what's going on with the opioid epidemic, I think, oh my gosh, this is exactly what's happening today. People are using ganja to get off crack cocaine. And in Illinois, with the dispensaries that are now open, they estimate a third to close to a half of the people that they are seeing in the dispensaries are there to relinquish their opioid addiction, and doing so really, really successfully. I think this is this really needs to be. It's coming out in the literature, and we're seeing more and more evidence that this is happening. But we don't have, there still is a sense of disbelief about this. So I sit on the Chicago Board of Health, and there are 4 physicians on that board. And I said, come on, guys. You can't tell me that some of you, they're all internal medicine and primary care. I said, you can't tell me that some of your patients haven't cured themselves by using cannabis. And they said, oh yeah, we're seeing that, we have seen it, but we didn't prescribe it. And I said, listen to you, you don't want to prescribe something that is very effective, pretty inexpensive compared to what else. You would rather see the pharmaceutical industry develop a very expensive synthetic product that only rich people will be able to afford, and that the taxpayers will pick up the bill for all the poor people who will need to have this antidote to opioid addiction. And that's sort of where we are right now on this whole issue, because until we really get it gets out into the public in a serious way, and I'm not sure at what point the anecdotal evidence becomes enough evidence to convince policymakers that we need to do something about this. So this, one of the things that has happened to me as I've gone through this 40 years of various aspects of children and pregnant women and adult women and so forth, is that I have really moved from being just a scientist, social scientist, to an activist. And I think when you see something that is there for the public's use and we're being denied, that people who do this research are obligated to speak out and to make sure their research is heard. So in addition to coming to California, which I very much enjoy, and talking to you, I try to speak at any Rotary meeting, a Lions meeting, a Chicago Club luncheon meeting, to let people know about this amazing substance called cannabis and what its potential is. And it's been a very interesting experience, because when I tell them the story, when I tell people that this substance 100 years ago was the most common element in our American pharmacopoeia, that every major drug company had preparations of cannabis and actually prescribed, and I'm sure you've seen them, but I have pictures or PowerPoints of prescriptions that say, cannabis tea, cannabis infusion 3 times a day. This was written in 1910. And the one I love most is the one that's written for Oklahoma, which continues to carry a 10-year mandatory sentence of and imprisonment for possession of any amount. And yet, here we are with a substance that was prescribed and by venerable pharmaceutical industry and by physicians who carried out those prescriptions. So as I've as I've sort of shifted from saying, guess what, here's my deal. I did the research. Here were my findings. And it's up to you policymakers or you clinicians or you educators to take those findings and get them out to everybody. Now I'm saying, no, I can't do that anymore. I have to be part of that group that is out there spreading the word and helping people understand what a profound substance this is, and that if it were discovered today, of course, it would be considered a miracle drug. But because it has this long history in a fear-driven society, we are reluctant to use what is there, what is available, the cheapest, most available substance we have for a serious addiction problem. So you've kind of heard my story. I have lots to tell you. It's being a cannabis researcher has been, I didn't ask to be one. I kind of fell into it. I didn't, as I mentioned before, I had never smoked anything, and here I was in this situation. I think some of the most troubling part of being a cannabis researcher, especially doing research in Jamaica, is, whoa, studying marijuana in Jamaica, how'd you get that gig? Wow, that's terrific, and let me know. And to take my research seriously. And I think others have had this experience. I probably have had it perhaps more just because of the location that I did the studies. But when you compare a place like Jamaica that has culture for cannabis to a place like the United States, who not only did not have a culture for it, but were a fear-driven society that could not take this risk. And in 1937, when cannabis became illegal, it was preceded by, a year and a half, 2 years of serious lobbying by the American Medical Association saying, please don't make this illegal. This is an important product that we need to be able to treat people with. And you see what has happened. But when I go out and tell these folks in Rotary and so forth what this is about, the response I get, which is very interesting, is not so much that, okay, I'm just going to go out and marijuana is not a bad thing, is to be tricked by their federal government for over half a century about something that is perfectly important and useful substance, and have been misled. So we have a lot to do in this industry and in this service. So it has given me, even though I'm retired from my position in academia, I find myself working perhaps even harder to educate people about this. Let me stop there because I've just been talking continuously, but questions?
All right, I have one.
Sure.
So you talked about how many like the land workers in Jamaica used ganja. However, what about other occupations? And how about like the economic status? Was it used there?
Yeah. I had 3 communities. One community was a farming community. These were self-employed farmers who would go to their bush every day and grow carrots and onions and so forth and take them to market. And they would use it every morning when they got up, have a little spliff, and then go to work. And about 10 o'clock when they had breakfast, they would have another, and then again after work, and maybe one during. And they felt that it had really helped them manage the work. I mean, these were farmers on foot and carrying large amounts of produce and so forth, and then taking it to market. The other group that I studied were sugarcane workers. And they also include factory workers and some administrators and drivers. And they were all, they used the amount of, I mean, they had a very measured approach to their use of cannabis, and used their ganja again in the morning and in the evening, but with no accidents or the things we might predict would happen from our perspective in this country. They were absolutely, things ran like clockwork. And so these were all rural working class men. I did not, and those were the ones who were really the cannabis users. They were not, I did not study, until I got to the crack cocaine study, I was not looking at urban populations at all. Did that answer your question?
It did.
It did.
Well, I was thinking about like doctors and teachers and how about.
Yeah. Doctors and teachers, there was a wonderful physician in this village who was absolutely fine with cannabis. He didn't use it himself, but he had no problem with his patients using it. And he had an interesting background because he had trained in England, he got his physician training there, and then went to University of Minnesota, where he got a degree in public health, and was well known and liked by the people. That he was the only physician there, but well known and liked. And he even published with me. One of the articles, Dr. Ronald Lampard, one of the articles he's my second author, and found that it was a very helpful substance to people, and they should be encouraged to drink the tea, and saw nothing wrong with at all. So he was, I think, because of that was one of the reasons he was particularly popular as well. But teachers, no. I found teachers were really struggling to move from what might have been working class into the middle class, and they were divesting themselves of anything that would speak to a working class behavior. And even though they may have ingested it as children or given by their mothers, they just wanted to separate themselves from what was a working class phenomenon.
Have you been in any other studies, or have you participated in a lot of other studies besides Thorny and Jamaica?
There have been the studies in the other two sites, Costa Rica and Greece, did not include women at all. It's very hard to do studies on women and children because they are considered a vulnerable population. And I had to convince the federal government that under no circumstances was I doing a double-blind study or administering marijuana or any substance to any child, infant, mother. I had to convince them that this was research that was in these were naturally occurring behaviors. All I was doing was recording the behaviors. And so that was very important. So in some ways you can only do a study like that in a place where, even though it was illegal, where it was in such common use that it was not hard to see those behaviors. It did require that I, develop 60 new friends, for example, so that people trusted me and that they would be able to feel comfortable telling me how much they used, when they used it, where they got it from. And one of the things about being an anthropologist and working, actually living in the community with the people with whom you're studying, is that you go through several trials of trust in the community, and when people are confident that they can confide in you, they will tell you all kinds of things. You almost don't even have to question them, and they'll let you in to observe those behaviors. And again, I was a nurse. That helped a lot. I delivered a lot of babies when I was in Jamaica because there was no one else. So, once someone delivers your baby, you tend to feel pretty comfortable with them. And I have a lot of godchildren now who are now big adults, older than you. But it was a useful skill set to have, to be able to treat people's problems. So developing the trust is a huge issue. But studying behavior in context is really, really important. And that's why when the studies that have come out in the United States on prenatal and use during pregnancy are usually done by a questionnaire, a research schedule that people can respond to. I do, I don't, or I do sometimes, or this is how many times. But to actually be in the place where you can observe people's behavior makes a huge difference, and you can relate it to other behaviors. I could understand, for example, which women were going to become the marijuana users, because they were usually women who were not dependent, the smokers, I should say. They all used it, but the ones who would become smokers were women who were independent of their men. They could take a chance, smoke when they wanted, and many of the women in our study whose children were exposed prenatally were also vendors. So one of the things that they could do that other mothers couldn't do is stay at home, have a home-based cottage industry in preparing and selling cannabis, and have their baby at home as with them as well. So they created a very important context for neonatal development in which they were with their babies constantly. So have there been any other studies like that? No. And it's unfortunate because it's the only way you can really study women and children. Otherwise, you would never get approved to do any other kind of study, but it would be good to do it. The other thing that made Jamaica such an important place to do this work is because you did not have, until very recently, you did not have multiple drug users. Women who used cannabis were highly unlikely to use any other substance, maybe an occasional beer. And since cigarettes in the area, actually tobacco cigarettes, were sold one cigarette at a time, they might, on a Saturday night to look cool, buy a cigarette and smoke it. But again, it was very, very rare. So we essentially had an opportunity to study cannabis, the actual effects of cannabis divorced from any other substance use. So it's an interesting thing. If some of the critics of the study from NIH types would say, well, that works in Jamaica, but I don't know. I don't think that the data would really apply here in the United States. And in fact, you can't do that study in the United States because there is so much multi-drug use in the United States, and not just tobacco and cigarettes and crack cocaine, but even pharmaceutical drugs, to be able to tease out the specific effects of cannabis. It's very hard to do here. Every society, every culture has its substances that it approves, and then its substances that it doesn't approve. When I went to Pakistan, I I was at the airport. I said, I think I'm going to go in and have a big martini, because I know I'm not going to have any alcoholic beverage for a long time, and I thought it was more of a ritual than because I needed a drink. I thought I just want to assert my independence from these ridiculous laws about alcohol. And but when we see what goes on in this country, when we have alcohol is allowed for pregnant mothers. We know the damaging effects of alcohol on pregnancy. We know them. And yet we can't find any for cannabis, and yet it's illegal. I have been doing a lot of, in the past, not so much recently, but in the past, a lot of court appearances that in response to some of the most heartbreaking stories of women, and I get these letters still about, even today in our so-called greater enlightenment, about every 6 weeks or 2 months, I get a desperate phone call or a letter from a family that says something like, my wife was having her first baby. They did a hair sample test during labor and delivery that was unauthorized. It was not approved. We didn't consent to it, and discovered that she is using cannabis. And the state authorities have come in and removed the baby and put the baby in foster care. These are the kinds of stories that have put me more into the activist role. And when I hear these stories and confronted with them, and some are much worse, believe me, where they're actually put the mother in prison. And recently, a Midwestern state, someone from a big Midwestern state called me and told me this story. And so I called the Attorney General of the state, and I didn't speak to him, but I spoke to his office, and I said, what is the problem? What problem are you trying to solve here? And it was very nice. I mean, I wasn't real confrontational or anything. I said, just explain to me. And they said, well, frankly, we do not believe that a child is safe in a house where there is cannabis, where marijuana is present. And I said, really? But your gun laws say that anybody can have a gun. You don't take a baby out of a house where there's a gun, or dishwasher detergent, or a bottle of aspirin, or any of the other things that can kill children and small children and babies. Why are you so focused on this? Or even other substances like opium or whatever kind of opioid or other crack cocaine. It's this issue of cannabis for some reason. And they don't have an answer, but they just feel that they're doing the right thing. It's really quite astounding. But we have classic, as I say, wrenching stories of women who have been imprisoned right after the birth of her child, with, you know, not even the proper clothing or services needed for a woman who's just given birth. That happened in Alabama. And so these letters still come. We really have a problem, and it's not going to go away unless we really become activists and do something about it. Even requiring permission to do a hair sample. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, I figured you would.
Fill me in on this, or correct me. In the Jamaican work on the cannabis using pregnant moms, I think there were 29 in the cohort, and maybe 29 controls, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was not even controls, but a comparative sample, a comparison samples. Yeah.
Were those pregnant women some of the actual conscious smokers, or might have they been the tea drinkers, or using it in various ways?
It's interesting, although I did not intend to do this. When we looked, we recorded all the cannabis use of every woman in that group. And we found that they really categorized into 3 major areas, which was great because we were able to look at the heavy users as well as the light users, and to see if there was any differences. And so we had women who smoked daily and several times a day, and they were obviously put into the heavy use group. And then we had women in the middle who tended to smoke recreationally or socially on weekends and use cannabis tea during the week. And then we had the third group were pretty serious cannabis tea drinkers and occasional smoking. So they might smoke maybe 2 or 3 times a month, something like that. They had to be smokers. They had to smoke cannabis at some point. But again, we really could not find a difference among the 3 groups in terms of the neonatal outcomes at all. They all performed, nor could we see any differences at age 2 and using the McCarthy scales, and then at age 5. There was just no evidence of any impact at all.
Now, that later data was more problematic in publishing, or it wouldn't get covered by pediatrics at that point? Or
I think pediatrics took a chance on us.
on the early reports?
Yeah. And I think we also, one of my co-investigators was a member of the Brazelton group. And the Brazelton group was a pretty powerful group at that time. Still is, and still highly respected. And might have, when they saw that the Brazelton group was involved in this study, might have helped it get published.
How many journals turned you down before pediatrics?
Oh, interestingly enough, all my nursing journals turned me down.
That's 6, 4.
Oh, yeah, for various papers. I mean, probably 15, 16. I mean, and the issue was, it was fascinating for me. What has this got to do with nursing? Seriously, the 3rd most commonly used substance in the United States by how many million people? What does this have to do with nursing? I just find it astounding that people that a profession could be so narrow-minded. There's a wonderful article which I'll send to you so you can put it online for students, that was published in the Lancet in 1989, where they talk about publisher bias in relation to all illicit drugs, although they were looking at crack cocaine primarily, and they found that the more benign the results, the less likely you're going to get published. If you say that this drug, for all drugs, because actually cocaine was probably not as serious during pregnancy as people thought at the time. But if you really find that this is an awful drug, terrible, your likelihood of getting published is much greater than if you say, well, there's a problem, but it needs to be monitored, and here's what has to happen. So between publisher bias and between the fear among our legislators to support anything that might not get them reelected, we have a problem in getting the truth out. And when I look back at this now 50-year career of dealing with cannabis, I think, it's not even so important for me anymore to discover the value of cannabis. It's, for me, the most important thing is to get the truth out, the real truth out, so that people understand this. I'm not advocating that people go out and smoke it, drink it, use it as a plaster, make a tea of it. I'm not advocating that at all. I'm just saying the truth is this is not going to harm you. And that we have been hoodwinked for 50 years, more than 50 years now, since 1937, about something that is just not true. And it's amazing how people can jump on that bandwagon. I was recently read an article about from a nursing colleague about how nurses have not written about cannabis. And so I checked the references in the back, and she didn't quote me at all. And any of my work. And of course it wasn't published in nursing journals, so I suppose that's one reason. But the nursing profession has many subspecialty organizations. One is addictions nursing. And cannabis was considered an addiction. It's not addictive. It was considered so that they never, because they were named addiction and they identify cannabis as an addiction, they would not entertain any research finding that would in fact contradict who they were. And so, this gets tied up in so many interesting ways that, Brett.
I have a question about the cane field workers.
Uh-huh.
Did you say that the management, the bosses, gave them a break to smoke cannabis, gave them time?
Oh yes. They'd, the men would have to take time. They'd have to stop cutting at some point and sit down, and they'd have a break. And if they were taking a break and had no cannabis, the bushers would come around on their horseback and pull out a big thing of cannabis and give it to them so they could roll it up and smoke it and work harder.
One of these days, American employers are going to get that message. I'm sure for some jobs like telemarketing, with these bored people have to be on the phones all day, and I'm sure
Seriously,
be a tremendous aid to that kind of work. Keep you stimulated.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised someday that will happen.
And then things will change.
I think things are changing. I am hopeful that things are changing. I think people are becoming much more enlightened and want to know the real truth. There will be some that will just
you know, I have just finished a stint as chair of the board of a very large healthcare system with over 90 hospitals in 26 states. And I have been urging them to be more open. And some of those states have cannabis laws in which you could, in fact, have clinics there. And I have urged them. And I was telling Jeff this morning, or this at lunch, that the CEO of the system, who is a physician, says, I don't know, Melanie, I don't know if I just can't, you know, it's just a big deal for me to really think about this. And I don't think I don't have the enthusiasm you do for this. And I said, what's the deal? What's the problem? And he said, well, when I was in college, I had a really good friend who got hooked up with cannabis, and he essentially, the amotivational syndrome, he dropped out of college, he didn't continue, all these terrible things happened to him. And I said, but you know, you're a scientist. It's just that illogic of that kind of thinking alone it does not work, because you know that millions of people use this substance, millions. And if that happened, if that were just an effect of the cannabis, everybody would be dropping out and not paying attention. I mean, the epidemiology of this substance alone is in a indication that we have, you know, that we can't go on vilifying a substance for which there's no evidence. Did you have another question?
Not right now. All right, you can continue.
Did they ever talk about why they thought it made them more productive, like compared to say here? Because you know, it seems like more of a group mentality that they're all agreeing that it does make them more productive.
Mm-hmm.
Here, you know, America is more like individuals disagreeing with, because this dogma in America is it doesn't make you productive. You know, it makes you lazy, all that stuff. But you know, over there, the whole culture is surrounded by it is productive. So.
Right. And you know, it's a good question, because it does take on, there's a sort of cultural folklore. And the cultural folklore around cannabis use in Jamaica is that when you smoke cannabis, it goes right to the brain, and it has an effect, a psychoactive effect. They don't use the term psychoactive, but it affects how you're thinking. And cannabis, when it's consumed as an infusion, when it's drunk, it goes into your blood. Okay, this is their folk explanation for it. And it makes you healthy and strong, and gives you protection for the future. You don't feel the effects right away, but it's for prevention. It's a strength-producing, appetite-producing substance. Appetite is very important in Jamaica. They do not like skinny people. They find them unattractive. So losing your appetite is not a good thing in Jamaica. Those psychoactive effects, when you ask farmers and cane workers, or women who are home attending to their gardens, cleaning their house, where they have a lot to do. And I found this true of pregnant women who consistently said, it just gives me the energy I need to do all the tasks I have to perform. And so it's embedded. But whether or not, how you would actually figure out why that is happening to them, why they feel it is happening, I think that still needs, that there's probably some explanation that I'm not aware of. But if a woman in Jamaica is exhausted, sits down, and she's just gotten her kids out, and remember, they don't have washers and dryers and all the things that we have. It's work. It's work to take care of a house and a family in Jamaica. And when they get exhausted and have this few draws on a spliff, and then just settle back for a minute and then just get up and go right to work. It's really quite remarkable to see. So
would they consume it through like you said, tea or baking somehow? Do they consume it that way more often than smoking it? For that reason, you said it like goes through their blood.
Yeah, women smoking. Well, the psychoactive effects of smoking gives one kind of experience. The tea drinking is really about making your body strong and healthy, and able to withstand, your 7-mile uphill walk to your bush to pick your vegetables and walk back again. So, and certainly with children, that little study that was done of children was very interesting for me because one, it showed what good parenting is about, that it's a sign of good parenting, not bad parenting. But these schools in Jamaica are likely to have 50 children in a classroom, with 4 children squeezed into a desk about this size, and lots of noise, lots of things going on. And for a child to concentrate in that kind of environment is really difficult. Parents believe that the ganja tea helps them concentrate in that kind of environment. And I'm not convinced that they're wrong. I think that it probably does.
Why just 2 or 3 days a week if it's so effective? Why not every morning?
Because they have a range of other teas that they need to give to their children.
For example?
Surasy, in case they have worms and need to be sort of evacuated on a regular basis. What would be some of the others? Thyme tea, and then just a chocolate tea once a week. So they try to mix it up and just not give their children the same tea all the time.
Was it the most common tea that every other children?
Yeah, if they had it. But it was also, if parents gave their precious store of ganja, which they use themselves, to their children, it means they're pretty good. They really wanted their children to succeed, and make sure that they always got it before an exam. So if they had to take an exam in school, they always made sure that the children had ganja tea ahead of time, and they did very well.
And what percentage of the kids are like this? Because you said you asked the teacher and she said, "Oh, this one, this one, this one." So is it like, did you like ask every kid if they get this tea and stuff?
No, I went to their houses. I lived in the community,
Oh, okay.
and so I'd go and meet with the mothers every day. There were only about 28 children in that study, and 33, something like that, around 30. And so I would, go to the mothers. I gave them a sheet to fill out, and I'd sit and talk to them. And this is the value of actually doing the research, to live where you're doing your research, because you can, talk. They trust you and they tell you the truth.
So, but out of those 30, all 30 were the kids?
The children who were getting ganja tea did very well. Very well. They were the leaders in their class. But as I say, they also got other things along with them. They got their little notebooks that they're supposed to bring to school. They had a sharp pencil. We're talking kind of primitive things, but fresh school uniforms to wear. And so how much is attributable to the ganja? It's hard to say. But I think one of the areas of research that really is going to be important in the future is looking at the significance of ganja preparations, and I'm not sure exactly, or cannabis preparations for children who are easily distracted. I have a son like that, who smart little kid, but about every end of September, we'd get the call from the teacher to come in and say, "Oh, Jay's so smart, but he just looks out the window all the time. He's not concentrating." I mean, you know, we got to expect it, really. And when he was about 15 is probably when he smoked his first marijuana cigarette. I mean, he didn't announce it, but it just changed his whole approach to school. He was able to focus in school. And I think we're missing a big opportunity for these kids who have attention deficit disorders. And I'm not recommending that they all go out and start smoking marijuana, but it seems to me that we should be identifying some kind of therapeutic substance that children who have different, I mean, Ritalin's a horrible drug, and if you can really get kids on something that is harmless and yet does the trick to keep them focused, I think it would be wonderful. Problem is that we don't want to we can't experiment with children. And I think maybe the best we could do is to get adults who had taken Ritalin as children, who were identified with this problem as children, because it continues into adults, or you learn how to manage it, and adults do okay. 25% of the people in this country do not read one book a year, not one. So I think in many ways that's a population that probably has had some attention deficit disorders when they've been in school. I think it's a huge area that cannabis could fix. But it'll be a while, I guess.
Do you have any idea if the population of kids of the ganja using families went on to be ganja users themselves as compared to the other cohort?
Okay, well, these were mothers who didn't smoke ganja, but it's not to say that they weren't ganja using families, because the fathers used it, of course. And ganja use is so prevalent in Jamaica that it would be hard to pick out, as it was hard to get controls for those studies. It's really hard. But we went back. I got a tiny little grant, and we went back to look at these kids who were then between 18 and 20. And oh my gosh, I mean, we found 14 of them. We didn't have a lot of time, but we found 14 of them just by going to the villages and asking where they were and everything. And it was so much fun. We pull up to the house and they'd look and, "Miss Mel, it's you?" And so then we took all the, "Okay, what are you doing now?" And so many of them had gone on to college. They became college in the sense of high school in Kingston, and then went on to do professions, accounting, which I thought was pretty good, and nursing and teaching and so forth. So again, we could not find, and these were all the using children. So they were. For at least 14 of them were doing just great, But since I don't have the whole sample and I don't have a comparison, I just didn't think it was yet worthy of publication. But gratifying to see these kids that were allegedly doomed by nurses and teachers to not succeed. In fact, succeeded quite nicely in a country that is difficult to succeed in. Yeah, but it is. It has been a wonderful. At some point in time, I'd like to just write memoirs of the events that have taken place. You know, the times I've been arrested, and so when people tell me, "Oh, yeah, how'd you get that gig?" I want to say, "Well, you haven't been arrested at the airport, and you haven't been, detained by police and put in jail in Jamaica, and you haven't done." It was not easy to do research. I had to leave my family, although I did bring my children. When my children were of age, I brought them. I mean, of age, they were like 1, 3, and 5. So, I'm so glad I did this, because it's the only study out there that has done this, of going to another culture, recording its use. Oh, and I told you I was going to get back to this 2-year mandatory sentence in Jamaica that has just been changed. They have finally legalized ganja in Jamaica, even though 90% of the people were using it steadily, including the police. And the reason that it was illegal is that Jamaica, it was the single greatest debtor country to the United States. We liked Jamaica a lot, especially after Cuba, after the Cuba Missile Crisis. Jamaica was our sort of strategic island on the way to South America. So it was really important to the US for defense and so forth. So we wanted Jamaica with us. On the other hand, we didn't want them importing marijuana to the United States. So the bargain was, we will forgive you. We will not call in your debt to us as long as you make sure that this is never legalized. Yeah, that was so for the Jamaican people, this was ridiculous, but for the government to government, this was the deal. And finally, Jamaica has gotten to the place and is no longer the impoverished place that it used to be, according to the UN. It's now sort of stepped up to almost middle class country. And evidently the debt has been somewhat diminished or forgiven, or that there's been enough inflation that it doesn't matter so much anymore. And they could take the chance and legalize. So now Jamaica's a free country to develop this. What I would like to do is, that's why I was so interested in your work, because I have always wanted to actually go down and establish senior living quarters in Jamaica, where people would get, a lot of older people in the United States would go down there, live in kind of a resort-like senior living, and be able to be under the care of many Jamaican people who like old people a lot, and take good care of them. I thought that would be a great place to spend my dotage, but for others as well. So it's nice to know that this is not illegal anymore. Yeah.
So you said like 85 to 9% of people were using cannabis, but like, was there a specific factor that caused the epidemic of crack cocaine? Like a specific reason why it suddenly just changed?
Yeah, it was just an access. There was never crack cocaine on the island before. And it was just when Jamaica became a transshipment point and it entered the island. and entrepreneurs found that there was a market, that they could create a market for this. And when I looked at, from the time that the fisherman put the bale in his boat off the coast and brought it in, from that time there were at least, that cocaine was touched 30 times before it got to the eventual user. That's 30 people who derived income and employment from that crack cocaine. So it was an amazingly lucrative, it was lucrative for some people. For others, it was just a way of making a living in an impoverished third world country that didn't have many ways of making a living. And at the same time, some of the reggae singers, the sort of second wave of reggae singers, had been exposed to crack cocaine here in the United States, brought that back to Jamaica. So there was a beginning association with, famous people. And, but it spread very, very quickly. I mean, in a matter of 2 years, we had many, many people in Jamaica addicted to crack cocaine. But when I put my students out looking at this across the island, I had a meeting with the chief of police in Jamaica, and he said, "I understand you're doing this work," and I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, can you tell us where these crack houses are?" And I said, I had students who were working in these crack houses or doing, collecting data there. And I said, "No, I can't do that." I said, and he said, "Well, I know your students are working with some of these people." I said, "That's right, they are. Our students have been here for 5 weeks. Your police have been here for years. And I bet your police officers know where every crack cocaine station in Kingston or Montego Bay is." So the police were very, very heavily involved in this, and always have been. Less so most police smoke ganja anyway. So, but they were obviously being paid off in the crack cocaine industry to make sure. So I said, in fact, I was invited to one of these transshipment events. I arrived there with someone when there were 2 police cars there. I said, "The police are here?" "Yes, man, we can't do this without the police." Without police protection, how are we ever going to bring crack cocaine and bring this teen into the country? So.
And so, what's the Jamaican culture now regarding drugs? Or do you keep up with it?
Yeah, I think they have it more under control. My goal was for USAID people who were coming down, who identified these women as multiple drug users, women who were using marijuana and using or ganja and using crack cocaine, and said, multiple drug users, we have to have this massive drug program. I said, no. They are not multiple drug users, they're self-treating. And once they understood that, then they could narrow down their programmatic efforts and make them much more specific to really help people. People wanted help. These women were desperate. And when they'd go to their families would just run them off and say, and I can understand why. These families had no money, but these crack cocaine using women would come in and steal their mother's wedding ring, and there's all this egregious behavior on the part of the user, and there was no treatment for them at all, none. So now they have better treatment, but mostly women and men are have treated themselves and gotten off crack. So it's nowhere near the problem that it was 15 years ago. It's still obtainable, and a lot of tourists will go down who are interested in it. But most tourists just like to go down and be able to sit on this beach and smoke a big spliff with the Jamaicans and enjoy themselves, in Jamaica and relax. I mean, that's the real deal. And I don't think that's going to change much. I think that's a cultural thing that will continue. And it's okay. Any other questions? Anybody ever in this room thinking about being an anthropologist or doing this kind of research?
I'd be interested in research. Yeah, that's something that it's interesting hearing from the different culture standpoints of where they're at. That's something I would be interested in researching.
It has been I think a great experience to do research that in another place and do it in context. It's very hard to understand any kind of human behavior when you take it out of the context in which it occurs and put it into the laboratory or a test tube and try to figure out what's going on. Or even to do a questionnaire or a survey. But when you actually can witness this behavior as it occurs, it's intelligible. You can understand it. And that's the real value of social science. I don't know if any of you are considering a career in social science, but I would say that we add an enormous amount. What we don't do is double-blind studies and have clearly formulated hypotheses. But what we do very well is record and compare human behavior. And that in itself can be extraordinarily enlightening and enriching for people to help them understand their own culture as well. So, anybody in nursing? Great. Is there a program here at Sonoma State? And where are you along in your?
I'm still pre-nursing, so I'll start applying next year to nursing programs.
Fantastic. It's a really great career. And people often say to me, nursing and anthropology, that's a kind of interesting mix. But what I have found is that in many ways, nursing is just the practice of anthropology. And I'm not sure why they actually don't require anthropology in the same way that they require pathophysiology and everything in nursing, because nursing is all about human behavior in context and comparisons. So you make those for each patient you have, you compare that with the patient you just had. So that's great. Congratulations. I hope you get through, and that's fantastic. Nurses have had a very active role in cannabis treatment for the ones who have sort of come over. And there is an organization of nurses in cannabis. I'm not so involved in it, but they're doing good work. And I ran into a former student of mine who was a nurse anesthetist and from Rush, and he had an anesthesia practice and was doing very well. And he's in New Mexico, and gave up his practice entirely so that he could treat returning Iraqi and other veterans with PTSD using cannabis. And he has had an amazing success rate, no suicides, getting them off all the medications that were given to them by the VA, which were 12, 13, 14 medications at a time. And getting them reintegrated with their children and their households and communities. Really, really great work. So I think we're going to see more and more of that in nursing practice. It lends itself to that kind of practice. What major are you in?
I'm doing kinesiology. Kinesiology.
Kinesiology. Okay, well that'll be very interesting. Yeah. Are you thinking about sports medicine kind of kinesiology or?
I'm looking into physicians.
Okay. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Good. And Eloisa, yes. What's your career plan?
Right now I'm majoring in biology, but I really want to get into optometry.
Aha.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the whole thing in Jamaica started in optometry. And because ganja smokers had no glaucoma. And the person who started that in Jamaica is a physician named Manly West, and he and his colleague developed a medication called Marinol, and it was drops. And it never, one of the big drug companies wanted to buy it in the United States, wanted to buy it from him, and for about $20,000. He said, "Oh, I don't think so." So it's marketed in South America very successfully. And
What's it called?
Marinol.
Oh.
Marinol. Yeah.
Drops.
Mhm.
Orally.
No, in the eye.
Topically.
Topically in the eye.
Mainly for glaucoma.
For glaucoma. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't realize they were doing that.
Yeah, it's for decades,
Mhm.
but it just hasn't. It never got here. Yeah. Okay, and David. It's David.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I'm doing computer science.
Computer science. Oh, so what interests? Why did you elect to come into this course?
I smoke weed. I don't know. Yeah, I needed an elective. And for my electives, this class was offered like a week before. Like it wasn't.
I know. Yeah.
It was last minute, and I still needed a class for an elective, so this worked out pretty far.
Well, that's fantastic. So this is a little different from what you're ordinarily doing in your
Yeah,
courses.
it's
Right?
different from the classes.
Uh-huh.
It's cool. It's a nice break. Not break, but.
Yeah, no, this is great. Uh-huh. And Isaiah?
I'm also a biology major, and hopefully go to medicine.
Uh-huh, great.
He
Great.
brought his father, a physician, to one of our classes a little ways back. It's nice to have him.
Oh, wonderful.
It was great.
Well, can I tell you anything more about...
Did you really study with Margaret Mead?
oh yes. She taught me how to do field work. And she was... the thing I loved about Margaret Mead, which has served me very well, Margaret Mead never got tenure at Columbia University because she had left the traditional path of academia and was writing for Parents Magazine and for the public. She took anthropology to the public, and the anthropologists, stuffy old white men, hated that in Columbia, and so they would never grant her tenure. But she was head of the largest natural history museum in the world. I mean, she had an enormous, important position. And I think when she was much older and they finally said, well, we could probably, we should offer you tenure. And she said, I don't really need it or want it. So that was a good thing. And, but the thing that she has been a role model for me is that sometimes you can't take just the academic route. And although I have published a lot, not just on this study, but some other things as well. But they go into these journals, obscure journals that nobody ever reads, unless they're about marijuana, and they seem to get read now. But I mean, that the public is not privy to. So when all these government officials keep saying, oh, we need more research, we don't know enough about this stuff, it's not true. There is tons of research out there, and it's been done, and it has been published. Much of it has been published in journals that are not immediately available to the public. They're available, but who would find them and read them, you know, is the deal. And Margaret Mead published in those kinds of journals too, but she's really felt that if American society needs to know more about how to handle adolescent behavior, they're not going to read those articles. She needed to put it in Good Housekeeping and Parent Magazine and the things that women who are raising children read. And not to worry about that other stuff of tenure and progression from assistant professor to full professor. And if it happens, fine. If it doesn't, you still have a career and you have a mission to educate people. And that's really how, although, you know, I certainly had the tenure thing, and I was a dean of nursing in 4 different universities. My mission has been, at least in the last 15 to 20 years, to really inform the public of the truth. And that's what she was doing too. So she set the stage for me, and that you can get along fine without promotion and tenure. Yeah.
Good to hear.
Yeah. She was an excellent role model and teacher person. If you ever have, I don't even know if they assign her in anthropology courses anymore, but if you ever have an opportunity to read Growing Up in New Guinea and Coming of Age in Samoa, it's worth a read. Fred, anything that...
I agree with you about Margaret Mead.
Yeah, she surpassed all of them. So, I mean, they were great anthropologists at Columbia, but when you think of anthropology, think of Margaret Mead. You know, she brought it to the public. Yeah.
Do you think of yourself as having been blackballed by the juridical academic world?
You know what? I don't hold any rancor for them at all, at even NIH. I really don't. I feel that people and organizations act in their self-interest. It's just a fact. And I can understand if I were head of NIDA, I mean, I don't think I would have taken that position, but if I were head of NIDA and I thought, oh, my budget is going to really go down as a result of this person's work, or funding of this particular scientist. I have to think twice. But what I think NIDA should do and NIH should do, which it doesn't do, is to actually go to Congress and say, we have have an audience with Congress and say, we have some really interesting findings, work that we didn't anticipate would happen. And here's what's going on. And you need to be informed so that you can inform your constituents when they have these, to really make this an educational model, not to say, oh, I'm not going to get any money if we fund this. But courage is greatly lacking in our culture today. And so sometimes you just have to take a stand and you have to go out there. But was I mad at them or do I feel, I think they were doing just what they felt they had to do. And I feel the same thing with editors' bias. They have a readership that they have to please. But instead of trying to educate their readership and help change their minds and find, another pathway, they just, I won't get any, people will cancel their subscriptions, and then what am I going to do for a living? So now I it's disappointing, and I would say I have a loss of respect for people who don't stand up for their data and their work and what they're supposed to do. No, I just look for another way and try to figure it out. But given the chance, and actually I did have the chance because in addition to having been funded by NIH, I was a member of the Charter Council of Public Representatives that was established at NIH about 10 years ago. And the Council of Public Representatives were selected to talk to the heads of the institutes and talk about what the public needs and wants to know and the kind of research that NIH should be doing. So I did have an opportunity to come back in a different form and talk about this, and really had the attention of the then director of interim director of NIH, who has died since then, and the institutes. And in some ways, that might have been impactful. I'm not saying I alone, but establishing the Institute for, what is it called? Alternative medicine. Is that?
Which mean Donald Abrams is in
FAAN?
Yeah, right. The institute where you could really explore non-allopathic medicines. And that came out of those discussions. Not necessarily me personally saying we've got to do this, because I didn't say that, but that we need to look, if we're really serious about healthcare in the United States, we can't just look at the same science that has guided us forever and ever. We have to step outside those boundaries and look at other ways of doing things, other ways of thinking and learning. And so, no, to answer your question, no, I don't.
You may not have gotten in the journals you would wish to have gotten.
Yeah, but right.
Water under the bridge.
But it's water under the bridge, and I think they have suffered for it.
Yeah.
They look conservative and rigid, and not with the program, the new program for young people. So,
I have my viewpoint as a clinician doing cannabis work and knowing what's coming out of. Fred's been working on a story that we can't publish yet until we get permission. But David Meary runs a laboratory at Technion Institute in Haifa, doing all the lab work for the Israeli cannabis.
that's where it's all going on, by the way.
Yes, that's true. And the tools that are available these days, with you fill 96 wells with cancer cells, and you can put a different strain in every well, and in a few hours with these automated scanning cameras, you can tell if the cannabinoids are doing anything or not. NIH could be doing so much to help with cancer treatment, among other things. Let us know about receptors that are relevant, or whether certain strains are capable of slowing or stopping the growth of a tumor, for example.
That's absolutely right, and they could, but they have to hear from the people. The legislators have to hear from the people to make that happen. It's the science. It's odd, but I mean, the scientists and the physician community and the other health science communities are not what's going to change it. They're ready to go. But unless people vote and call in and try to meet with the legislators, we don't really have a lobbying group. We've had them, but they haven't had anywhere near the financing that the pharmaceutical industry, the traditional pharmaceutical industry has had. So, and now with cannabis becoming big business and the market, it's just amazing. If you have, cannabis in your portfolio is incredible. I think we might see something. I think it can happen. And when our Attorney General says that we you know what the Attorney General says, but then you go to Ohio, where all the men who were mining coal are now growing cannabis and making as much money. That's the kind of convincing evidence that we need to say, yeah, we have to get a grip on this nationally and do something different. So, well, you guys.
Did you see the Sanjay Gupta special on Sunday night?
I did. I couldn't get to see it because I was traveling, but was it different from his earlier one?
He keeps following the story. You can get it.
I will.
It's well worth watching.
Okay.
He's really done a great thing.
He's a great advocate for this. He really is, and people believe him.
There's a woman named Stacy Gruber who does brains imaging neuroimaging at Harvard Medical School. She used to be all about harm, and her images used to show harm and damage to the developing brain. And now she's showing better organized white matter, and the wind is completely shifted. She's finding benefit.
That's very interesting. Well, you go where, as a scientist, you go where the money is too. I mean, that's true. But I think in addition to attention deficit disorder, I think if something can be done with very elderly people, I never saw dementia in Jamaica. I never saw, and they live long. In Jamaica, they have a longer lifespan than we do. And I never saw a case of dementia. Now, I'm sure there were some, but in all the villages I lived in, Kingston and everywhere, it just wasn't there. So I think it's worth really examining the role of this substance on brain functioning of older people, really older people. So, lot to do. It's all you biology, physician, and nurse, everybody. There's a job for you out there on this. Any last questions? You've been a very, very attentive group. Thank you so much for the opportunity to meet with you today.
So where did you travel from? And where do you live? Yeah.
I live in Chicago.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I'm a New Yorker originally and now transplanted to another really great city. Chicago's a wonderful place. And it's great there. As I said, I have a son living up here. I have two sons, one on each coast. So Chicago's pretty good. I don't get to babysit very often, but at least I can get out to see both of them. It's only one flight from Chicago. So
are you currently doing nursing? Or?
Currently, I do a lot of governance work. I do a lot of this work of talking to various groups who know nothing about cannabis. And then I also do a lot of governance. So I sit on, I mentioned, a large hospital board. I also sit on a Blue Cross Blue Shield board, and I carry the message to them as well. We could save a lot of money and reduce our premiums if we did this. I'm on the Chicago Board of Health, and I'm on 2 academic boards in Loyola University, who just did pretty well in the Final Four, and University of Minnesota. And then I sit on the Patients Out of Time advisory board. So they'll be having a meeting very soon. That's a group that I really admire a lot. And the reason I admire, and I like going to the meetings, is that at those meetings you will meet cannabis enthusiasts, people who just think this should be out there and legalized. Policymakers, lawyers who have dealt with these cases, scientists, clinicians. And so it's not most places you go for a meeting, you meet, other clinicians or other policymakers or something. This brings them all together around a single issue, and the opportunity to meet people who can really make this happen. I did the first meeting of this group took place at University of Iowa when I was dean there. And that was really probably my shift from science to activist, or the inclusion, the moving toward being an activist. And that single meeting has grown into now, I think it's 12th meeting that took place in 2001, I think. And now they were having them every other year. Now they're having them every year. And it's attracted an international audience of science investigators, Hebrew University in particular, which has been done fantastic work. The other thing that we face in this country is a real arrogance about research that has been done outside of this country. So they'll believe it if it's from their own funded investigators here, but there's been great research going on in Canada. Hyperemesis gravidarum, morning sickness. The Canadians and Scandinavians, Sweden, have done wonderful work on the use of cannabis, and of course Jamaicans used it for that purpose as well. And but France, England, Canada, Italy, Spain, Israel for sure, big time, have done hundreds of research studies, but they are systematically ignored by the science communities in this country, which is too bad because it's been great work. England especially, wouldn't you think? Ethan Russo's work over there with that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Jeffrey, GW.
Right.
That group. Continuing with their GBM brain tumor studies, because it was successful with trifle of cannabis. They were getting 32 milligrams a day at the maximum of cannabinoids, and it was extending their life significantly, so they're extending the study.
Wow.
That's not much cannabis, but they're recognizing it's doing what it was said to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, the wonderful thing about science is, and especially in this field, is that, and I think Mitchullam's work is probably the major the sort of star of this, is that once we understood the endocannabinoid system, once we grasped that and understood why it has all these other effects, became explainable, and continued research on that area. I like the work he's doing now, Raphael Mechoulam is doing now, which is taking it to an even higher level, which as an anthropologist, I really appreciate, because the reason for our success as a species has been because we work in communities. We're not like the lone Neanderthal who wandered out there by himself and, was eaten by bears or something. I mean, we have being a community has been, what's has made us so successful. He in Mechoulam's work, where he has developed what's commonly called the bliss molecule. We've probably been talking about that anyway. The idea of anandamide, that and the example he gives, which I love because it really says something about the way humans relate to each other. You walk down the street and you see a bunch of kindergartners playing, and you think, oh, aren't they cute? And they are cute. They're adorable to see these little 5-year-olds. And then you recognize that one of them is your grandchild. And you have a completely different feeling. You have an excessive feeling, a feeling of love. Oh, that's my grandchild. When, for the common eye, they're no different from any of the other children who are playing there, right? They're just rationally, there's nothing special about them. But they're special in your mind because they're your grandchild. That experience of, it's what gets really close to love and the ability to forgive and the sort of spiritual midwifery, the explaining a biological basis for our sense of community and why we need to be in communities. I don't want you to think I'm like too far out there and all this, but I really, when you think about it, when you think that here we have a substance that is, or we produce endocannabinoids that allow us to forget, which is really, really important, because if we remembered the pain of childbirth, we might not have more. And allow us to, they don't make us hungry, but those endocannabinoids allow us to really enjoy the food we're eating, to take pleasure in eating. Taking pleasure in eating also is important for human evolution, because eating's not that easy. You have to grow the thing, or you have to hunt the thing, and then you have to prepare the thing, and then you have to serve it and eat it and clean up afterwards. So can you imagine being alive if we didn't really love to eat, that food didn't taste good? It's just we did it in order to stay alive. And the same with sex. It doesn't make you run out and want to rape somebody, but what it does is allow you to enjoy sex in a way that you might not have enjoyed it without. That's important, again, for human evolution. So food, sex, and forgetting are all evolutionary criteria which our species can be perpetuated. That's pretty cool. And then if you put the sort of that special feeling of affection, love, forgiveness on top of it, then we have sort of a biological foundation for human evolution and community building. Well, for community building, which is, of course, how we've been successful. So I'm just so in love with this work that's going on in Israel. It's from certainly a biological basis, but also from an anthropological. How do we continue as a species to exist? It's a big deal. So. Anything more? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. Take care of this part of the business.
cross paths with Howard on this at NIH?
Oh, he appointed me. Yeah. And then he went to New York. He left me, appointed me, and then took off.
Sloan Kettering.
Yeah.